right, I think we are recording. Okay, so hey everyone, welcome to our latest event. This is Ultimate Guide to Managing Migraine Naturally. I'm Dr. Joseph Kappas, clinic owner here at Delta Neurohealth. And yeah, we're going to be going through all about migraine today. Before I get into my presentation, though, I'd actually like to invite my wife, Justina Pappas, who is also our marketing director, and to come up and share a little essay that we actually found she wrote when she was back in college. So I thought that this would be very pertinent for what we're here for tonight. So come on up.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to read a little essay back from college, and I think it's very applicable to day or work environment as well. However, this one is specific to college since I wrote it during my college experience. So, migraine. It's not just a headache, it's a migraine. This isn't just another one of your wake up after a night of endless drunkenness, hangover type migraines. But the problem is that the word migraine gets tossed around so much in our everyday vocabulary that people begin to forget that it is an actual chronic illness. There isn't enough research done on migraines, and the main reason is that the word gets tossed around and used interchangeably with headaches to the point where we forget that it is an actual medical condition. Migraineurs suffer at least 15 days a month with a headache most hungover people experience for a few hours. Imagine this. You're sitting in a classroom and all of a sudden you start seeing white lines in your vision as everything begins to blur. You get dizzy and your head starts spinning as the fluorescent lights above become unbearable to look at. You turn to look away from the lights and stare at the floor, but now the professor's voice is amplified. So loud, you might as well be at a rock concert in the front row, right by the blasting speakers. You look up, hoping nobody notices you squinting, trying to draw attention away. You try to participate and raise your hand just as the nausea hits. Stomach revolting, gut wrenching, turbulence, and you think you're going to hurl right as you're called on. It seems like the whole world is looking at you as your body starts to go numb from the pain, almost paralyzing. As you start to ask the question, you feel your words jumbled together and your speech turns into a mumble. You wonder, can anyone tell? Can anyone see? Can anyone feel what I'm feeling? Is it obvious that I'm struggling? You excuse yourself to go to the bathroom. After class, you go home and become a potato. Not the lazy kind of couch potato, but the kind that is so paralyzed with pain you cannot move. Seeking shelter in a dark room, forcing yourself to try to fall asleep and make the pain go away as you lay down. Your neck becomes stiff, body immobile in excruciating pain, stomach nauseous, pins and needles in your head, laser swords poking behind your eyes, and no relief in sight. You're uncomfortable in your own skin. After finally forcefully falling asleep, you wake up realizing you missed 2 classes and you go to email your professors, but the migraine has still not gone away, and the light from the laptop is unbearable. It hurts too much. Alone in pain, behind in school, anxious about everything, depressed by the situation. Nobody talks about this seemingly silent sickness, this neurological condition that I cannot control. I cannot control the struggle I have with migraines, but I can control the way we speak about them. I cannot make the chronic illness go away, but I can choose to exercise cura personalis. Care for the self that requires going beyond just what's at the surface, to a full connection of mind, body, and spirit. They all need to be connected, and self-care involves making sure that the entire person is taken care of as a whole. I cannot create medications that will work, but I can change the conversations to include more funding for researching solutions. I cannot find the medical help and research it will take to finally find something that works for migraines, but I can change the context in which we talk about migraines. Let's change this endless cycle once and for all. Let's be more compassionate, empathetic, and understanding of those around us who are suffering. Let's be men and women for others simply by changing the way we speak. We cannot unite with those suffering by being we can unite with those suffering by being flexible and adaptable in the way we carry on our conversations. When was the last time you asked someone struggling, "How can I help you?" We cannot control the way we feel, but we can control the way we respond to things. I cannot control my migraines, but I can control the way I respond to them. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Justina. Um, so as you could probably hear from her essay, she was struggling quite a bit at that time with migraines. That was kind of at the peak of her struggle, I would say. And then when I met you not too long after, you were experienced about 28 migraine days a month, which if you think about how many days there are in a month, that's just about all of them. So she was not in a very good place, to say the least. And you had tried just about every medication that they could throw at you, and she felt like a zombie. She could not, that was no way to function either. So she was kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, and that, suffer with the migraines or, become a zombie from the medication. But luckily, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but
Came across functional neurology.
yeah, so she came across she met me. We did some functional neurology work with her. We started working on diet, we started working on hormonal health, a lot of the things we're going to talk about tonight, and we got those down to about once a quarter. So, you know, she, just like, just about everyone with migraine, is going to be predisposed to migraine and always susceptible to developing migraine. But with the appropriate and individualized specific treatment, it is definitely possible and probable that you can live a life without needing to worry about migraine and without needing to be reliant on zombifying medication. So let's get into it. So who is this presentation for? We kind of summarized that just now. So those individuals who are struggling with migraine or who know someone struggling with migraine and have not been able to find relief for their migraine through medication, or worse, have seen regression actually from medication. This isn't necessarily for people who are satisfied relying on medication. If medication works for you and that's your thing, great. But if you're looking for kind of a natural alternative, some way that you can actually, overcome migraine without needing to be reliant on these pharmaceuticals, this is the presentation for you. So let's give a few statistics about migraine. So it is the sixth most common cause of disability in the country. A lot of missed days because of migraine. It costs the US $19.6 billion, both in healthcare expenses and in lost time at work or lost productivity. 38 million people in the US suffer from migraine, and less than 50% of those migraine sufferers, actually feel like they are being effectively treated. That's a lot of people who are being ineffectively treated. Okay. And I know I put up some dollar signs and some statistics, and that's sad and all, but at the end of the day, the most important thing about migraine is you and your suffering. And that's really the true cost of migraine. So, okay. So let's get into a little bit more about what migraine actually is. The word migraine kind of gets thrown around a lot some people just assume they have migraine because they have intense headaches, and not to discount that pain, but typically migraine is defined by the following characteristics. So it is a type of headache. There are recurrent attacks. Usually it will be moderate to severe in intensity. You'll have pulsating pain. Typically, you're only going to find it on one side of the head. Very often, it is preceded by an aura, and we'll get into that a little more later. And then commonly accompanied by migraine, when you're having the migraine, is nausea and then light and sound sensitivity. So going a little further. So what's going on kind of physiologically? So in migraine, there is an alteration in the chemical ion function of the brain. Okay. So most of it, which like is said here, is located in the brainstem, which can manifest in the vestibular nuclei, the midbrain, the medulla, or the pons. Many people may have heard of vestibular migraine, for example. There are many autonomic findings present, like blood pressure, heart rate, sweating, pupils, digestion. All of those things can be impacted and observed. The brain is in a hyper-excitable state, and then this leads to an activation of nociceptive pain fibers in the trigeminal ganglion. So going back to the first thing I mentioned, so the brain has an altered chemical ion function. This leads then to the brain being in a hyper-excitable state. So while a lot of people with migraine say like, oh, this is a trigger, chocolate's a trigger, yada yada is a trigger, there are a lot of things that can be triggers for one person that may not be a trigger for other people. But essentially, with someone who has migraine is neurophysiologically more likely to suffer from that trigger. So that trigger is more likely to tip the scale for the brain, where it depolarizes, and the pain of migraine comes from that because it's already in such a hyperexcitable state due to that chemical ion function. So yeah, so it could take something simple as like lack of sleep or a missed night of sleep or alcohol or maybe gluten to just over put the brain over the edge. When we think about migraine, there are four main phases. So the first phase is called the premonitory phase. Within this phase, here are some things that could happen. So you may not even know that you're about to experience a migraine, but these things could be early warning signs. So you could have mood changes such as irritability. You could be fatigued. You could start craving food or have certain food cravings. Your neck might get stiff. You might start yawning, and the light and sound sensitivity may begin during this phase as well. The second phase, which many of you may be aware of or may be familiar with, is the aura phase. So this happens in a third of migraine sufferers. This phase can actually last for up to 72 hours. Oftentimes it's visual in nature. However, it could be auditory or olfactory, so on and so forth. And then during this phase is where something called cortical spreading depression occurs. So this is the main pathophysiological hallmark of migraine. Okay. So what is cortical spreading depression? So like I said, the hallmark clinical phenomena of migraine. This is a slow spreading wave of neuronal activity, starting at the back of the brain, making its way forward. This is prolonged by inhibited cortical activity for 15 to 30 minutes, and it leads to the activation of peel matter, pain fibers in the cortex, which then leads to neurogenic inflammation, vasodilation, and then mast cell degranulation. So I have a video here. So here's a video representation of what cortical spreading depression is. So you're going to see it's starting at the back of the brain. It's making its way forward. Okay. This is the brain kind of depolarizing as it goes through. So you'll see it come, and this is in a matter of minutes, right? Okay. And then here's another video kind of zoomed in on the vasculature. This is actually a mouse brain, but you see the little white kind of light that goes past the screen. That's the cortical spreading depression there, and you can see how the vasculature changes as a result. Okay. So following the aura phase and the cortical spreading depression, now comes the classic, reason why people tend to suffer and seek help, and that is because of the headache phase, which that in and of itself can last 4 to 72 hours. Like I said earlier, it'll be moderate to severe, typically one-sided. It'll be pulsatile or throbbing in nature, and it tends to worsen with both physical and mental activity, which is why people tend to struggle so much going to school, going to work, leading to more lost days. Once the headache phase concludes, that's where we enter the postdrome phase. Okay. This concludes the cycle, characterized by fatigue. Neck stiffness comes back. So, lucky you, you get the neck stiffness before and after, and then focus and concentration difficulty. So if we look at the total timeline of migraine, one migraine cycle could start and last 72 hours for the first phase, and then take maybe another 24 hours for the second phase, and then 72 hours for the third phase, and maybe another 24 hours for the postdrome phase. And before you know it, a whole week you've been in a migraine cycle. And if you don't do something to stop the cycle in its tracks, this is just going to continue to perpetuate or continue on. So a concept that was introduced to me is the bucket theory, and I love this theory for migraine. And if you accept what we've talked about already, it's going to make a lot of sense. So imagine that your brain is a bucket, right? My brain bucket may be able to hold more water than maybe a migrainer's brain bucket, right? Because I'm not genetically predisposed to migraine. However, if you are genetically predisposed to migraine, let's say you have a smaller bucket, so you're able to hold in less water, less of these stressors that you see on the screen. And what happens, because the brain is excitable or hyperexcitable, it's going to depolarize more easily than somebody who's not susceptible. Things like nutritional stresses, eating the wrong thing, hormonal stresses. Most migraine sufferers are women, and women go through their monthly cycle. And if there's imbalances in their monthly cycle, chances are that could lead to enough stress to put you over the edge and lead you to a migraine. Musculoskeletal stress. Say you hurt your neck, hurt your whatever it might be. You might have, stiff neck from, a head injury, a neck injury, whatever it may be. That kind of stress, those pains are going to lead to increased susceptibility or likelihood of migraine spilling over. And then psychological stress as well. So what's your home life like? What's your work life like? What's your school life like? Are you kind of at your wit's end with stress, where it's just filling up your bucket faster than you're able to offload it? So all of these things, while it may not be one thing this time or the other thing that time, it's usually a combination of all of them. So we need to address them all. So we can't leave anything out of consideration here if we want to really tackle migraine. So the 4 key considerations when it comes to the management of migraine are as followed. First, we want to look at neurophysiology. How big, how small is your bucket? How much stress are you able to hold on to before a migraine starts? Diet and lifestyle, that speaks for itself. What are you eating? What's good for migraine? What's not good for migraine? Hormonal balance, hormonal regulation. Is your cycle synced? And then musculoskeletal function. So with neurophysiology and migraine, that is where we as functional neurologists really step up and fill in this role. So with our functional neurology evaluation or neurophysiological evaluation, what we're going to do is a in-depth, concentrated exam looking at your personal neurophysiology. What we want to understand is, where are the pain points? Where are those disrupted ion channels? Like we mentioned, oftentimes they are located in the brainstem, but there are many other areas of the brain that could be involved with migraine. So we want to identify them, and then we want to create an individualized and non-invasive treatment plan specifically to address those parts of the brain that are neurophysiologically weak. Okay. So if we're able to do that, we can actually increase the strength or the resilience of the brain. And by doing that, you're more likely to be able to tolerate the stressors of life. Okay. And like I mentioned, everything we do from a migraine standpoint or from a neurophysiological treatment standpoint is non-invasive and it's personalized. No migraine patient is the same. No brain is ever the same. So we really have to take each individual case by case. Okay. Then using the theory of neuroplasticity, the idea that the brain has the ability to adapt and change if it's given the appropriate stimulation, we should be able to make long-lasting changes to the brain. So like I mentioned, you're less susceptible to the stressors of life. However, this takes specificity, this takes novelty, this takes salience, and this takes repetition. Okay. So it's not an overnight thing. So an example of something we may do as therapy, like I mentioned, the trigeminal nerve is typically hyperpolarized. This is the nerve that transmits pain and sensation from the face to the brain. So this becomes oversensitive, which this neurovascular bundle of the trigeminal system is the key area of pain. So this is one of our key areas of treatment. So we might do things that help calm down this trigeminal neurovascular bundle, using things like non-invasive electrical stimulation. We might use like air. We might use eye movements. We might use just different body movements, things like that. Things that so the next consideration we want to think about is diet and lifestyle. Okay. So not just diet, but also what other lifestyle factors do we need to consider? So first, diet. Some high level or some, 300-foot view considerations that we want to consider. The first thing is regulating blood sugar. This is one of the most important things you can do if you have migraine when considering diet. How do we do that? We want to make sure we're consuming healthy fats, adequate protein, raw and steamed veggies, low glycemic foods, fruits, minimal grains, always gluten-free. And then we want to make sure we're drinking plenty of water and keeping up with our electrolyte balance. So while those are important things to aim towards or go towards, I also want to talk about, but not dwell on, things we ought to avoid. So the things that I recommend my patients absolutely avoid when it comes to migraine, or if they have migraine, are the following: gluten, caffeine, alcohol, nitrites, MSGs, artificial sweeteners, and oftentimes dairy products. And then I ask them to moderate things like chocolate, citrus, sometimes fermented foods, sometimes foods high in histamine, and then if there are any other known triggers that we've been able to uncover. Now, the moderation list is not for everybody. Not everybody needs to do, low histamines or low fermented foods, but for some people, that is very important. Here are a few supplements that I often recommend. We're not going to go too deep into that, but B vitamins, E and D omega, turmeric, and CoQ10 can be very helpful just in general. Some people need more specific recommendations, but just as a kind of 300-foot view, that's what we're looking at. From a lifestyle standpoint, sleep is very, very important. Getting at least 7 to 9 hours a night, trying to keep consistent hours of sleep as well. So that means going to bed at the same time, trying to wake up at the same time, even the weekends, as hard as that is to do. We want to make sure we're getting 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity exercise. And this could be as simple as 30 minutes of walking 5 times a week. Not that hard. If you're not able to walk, then you could do things with your hands. There's so many different options. High intensity interval training exercises or HIIT exercises are very helpful as well. You also want to make sure we're minimizing screen time and blue light exposure. There are a lot of ways that we can mitigate this, even in our technologically obsessed world. So some things could be a blue blocking screen, some blue blocking glasses. Something that I also find has been helpful for a lot of patients is a flicker-free monitor. And if you email me, I can give you a link to the one I really like. So even though we're inundated with screen time, our phones, our laptops, work, school, all of it, there are still ways to at least minimize the harmful effects of screen time and kind of reduce the overall burden that stress is filling up your bucket. Okay. We also want to manage stress. So, like we mentioned earlier, psychological stress is a big factor that might fill up that migraine bucket. So, how might we do that? Doing things like meditating, praying, therapy, seeking psychological support. Like I said, whether that be talk therapy or there's a lot of different types of therapy, ways to address how you're doing mentally and psychologically, like somatic experiencing, neuro-emotional technique, emotional freedom technique, DNRS. The list goes on and on. So it's kind of, you pick what works best for you. And I'm happy to go into some of those in more detail, but for now, just finding what works best to manage stress. Just breathing, doing concentrated breathing can do wonders for stress. And then limiting environmental and chemical stressors. So what might this look like? Think about things like your Glade plugins, your air fresheners, your colognes, your perfumes, your candles. Don't shoot the messenger, but candles can be triggering of migraines. So these are all different chemical stressors, and the accumulation of all these stressors are just going to increase and increase the likelihood that a migraine is going to occur. Okay. The third thing we want to consider, or key consideration with migraine, is hormones. Okay. Like I said, women outnumber male sufferers 3 to 1. Women go through this thing called their menstrual cycle every month, where they have ebbs and flows of progesterone and estrogen. And if these hormones are out of sync, out of balance, chances are a migraine might occur. Maybe your healthy estrogen is low relative to your quote unquote unhealthy estrogen. What do we need to do in order to resync that? So, and it's not just important to assess hormone function in women, it's also important to consider this in men as well. Some things that I like to use when looking at hormones is first running a Dutch test or complete cycle map test. So this is a dried urine hormone test. And what we can look at is actually how do your hormones fluctuate from the beginning of your cycle through the end of your cycle, the follicular phase through the luteal phase. Is your estrogen spiking when it's supposed to? Is your progesterone spiking when it's supposed to? Do you have too much of one? Do you have not enough of another? And based on your day-to-day output uh, of estrogen and progesterone, among other hormones, and then we compare that to when you might experience your migraines. We can say, okay, this looks like this is the problem area of your hormonal cycle. What do we need to do, either from dietary standpoint, lifestyle standpoint, supplement standpoint, maybe, to address this specific issue of your hormonal cycle so that we can ease that stressor and make it less likely that your migraine will occur. A really great resource that I love recommending, and I know if I can say Justina has also benefited from this thought process, but cycle syncing. So the book In the Flow by Alyssa Vitti, really good information there. Would highly recommend that. Just talking about how to structure your life, like I said, from a dietary standpoint, from a how to structure your projects at work, how to structure your exercise based on your cycle, how to structure your social engagements based on your cycle. And if you can understand where your strengths and weaknesses are at different phases of your cycle, you can optimize them, and then you can reduce the kind of friction that you might have if you go against that optimal what would be optimal at that point in your cycle. The last or the fourth main consideration that we want to think about is the musculoskeletal system. So the musculoskeletal system includes muscles, bones, joints, ligaments, and tendons, okay? Your body. So if we have muscular tension or joint misalignment, this can cause increased stress to someone who's suffering with migraines, just leading to the higher likelihood of a migraine occurring. So the area that I'm typically most concerned with migraine is the suboccipital region of the cervical spine. So right at the base of your skull, a lot of times when this gets tight for whatever reason, it can lead to higher likelihood of migraine occurrence. And just like addressing somatic or psychological stressors, there are 1.5 million ways to address the musculoskeletal system. Here are some of maybe the more common ones, some of the more common ones I use. And don't get mad if your favorite one isn't on the list or if the one that worked for you isn't on the list, because there are a number of ways to address this. But chiropractic comes to mind first, physical therapy, acupuncture, massage, or different types of myofascial work. Cranial work goes into that. Cupping, scraping, taping. They're not as bad as it sounds. And then various electrical stimulations that might help loosen those muscles. So a lot of great things to consider that can be helpful. And if one doesn't work for you, try another one. There's always something else that you can try that might be helpful. Everybody's body is different. Everybody's going to respond different to different therapies. So, here are some other special considerations that we have to keep in mind when it comes to working with migraine patients. We're not going to get too deep into this because each of these topics deserves its own event night. So I'm just going to list them off. But have you had a previous concussion or a head injury, which is actually going to be what our next event is going to be on. But concussion or head injury. Have you been exposed to mold? Are you susceptible to mold? Lyme disease, carbon monoxide poison, maybe other chronic infections like Epstein-Barr virus or long COVID. All these things can add to that overall burden to a migraine sufferer. So that being said, I want to thank you again for coming to the presentation. Just to summarize, migraine is not always best managed by medication. And we could see from the statistics, only 50% feel that they are being adequately managed by medication. The rest, what do? We need to take a very in-depth, non-invasive, and natural approach to the 4 plus the special considerations that I mentioned through individualized care, taking you where you're at. Not everyone's going to need hormonal support. Not everybody's going to need dietary support. Some people may have that stuff locked. Not everybody might need neurophysiological support. Not everybody needs musculoskeletal support. But chances are, if you're suffering with migraine, one, if not all of them, are a major contributing factor, and addressing them is going to do a world of difference for your life. So if you want to find out more about us, Delta Neural Health, feel free to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, we're on YouTube, TikTok, and then we have our podcast, the Neural Health Broadcast, which you can find on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Before we take questions, our next event is going to be concussion, fixing the problem. That will be April 18th at 7 o'clock, same time, same place here at Delta Neural Health. Love to see you there. So if you or anyone you know is suffering with the after effects of concussion, we'd love to talk to you about what can be done. And yeah, I just want to say thank you. This is our number, and that's my direct email if you have any questions or need any further resources. We do have a migraine resource guide, so if you could put your email down, if you haven't already, on the sheet, or you can send an email directly to me, we'll be happy to get that resource to you. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording and then take some questions.